Hello, my darling, and welcome to today's story time. Today we have a blowing wind in the background, and we are reading A Souvenir of Pompeii. And now, on with our story time. 3 young friends who had undertaken an Italian tour together last year visited the Study Museum at Naples, where the various antique objects exhumed from the ashes of Pompeii and Herculaneum have been collected. They scattered through the halls, inspecting the mosaics, the bronzes, the frescoes detached from the walls of the dead city, each following the promptings of his own particular taste in such matters. And whenever one of the party encountered something especially curious, he summoned his comrades with cries of delight, much to the scandal of the taciturn English visitors who studiously thumbed their catalogues. But the youngest of the 3, who had paused before a glass case, appeared wholly deaf to the exclamations of his comrades. So deeply had he become absorbed in contemplation. The object that he seemed to be examining with so much interest was a black mass of coagulated cinders bearing a hollow imprint. One might easily have mistaken it for the fragment of some statue mold, broken in the casting. The trained eye of an artist would have readily therein recognized the impression of a perfect bosom and a flank as faultless in its outlines as a Greek statue. It is well known, indeed the commonest traveler's guide will tell you, that this lava, in cooling about the body of a woman, preserved its charming contours, thanks to the caprice of the eruption that destroyed 4 cities. That noble form, though crumbled to dust nearly 2,000 years ago, has come down to us. The rounded loveliness of a throat has lived through the centuries in which so many empires perished without even leaving the traces of their existence. Chance imprinted upon the volcanic soiree, that seal of beauty remains unobliterated. Finding that he still remained absorbed in contemplation, Octavian's friends returned to where he stood, and Max, touching his shoulder, caused him to start like one surprised in a secret. Evidently, Octavian had not been aware of the approach of Max or Fabio. "Come, Octavian," exclaimed Max. "Do not stay lingering whole hours before every cabinet, else we shall get late for the train and miss seeing Pompeii today." "What is our comrade looking at?" asked Fabio, drawing near. "Ah, the imprint found in the house of Arrius Diomedes," and he turned a peculiar, quick glance upon Octavian. Octavian slightly blushed, took Max's arm, and the visit terminated without further incident. On leaving the Study Museum, the 3 friends entered a corricolo and were driven to the railway station. The corricolo, with its great red wheels, its tracked seat studded with brass nails, and its thin, spirited horse, harnessed like a Spanish mule, and galloping at full speed over the great slabs of lava pavement, is too familiar to need description here, especially as we are not recording impressions of a trip to Naples, but the simple narrative of an adventure which, although true, may seem both fantastic and incredible in the extreme. The railroad by which Pompeii is reached runs almost its entire length by the sea, whose long volutes of foam advance to unroll themselves upon a beach of blackish sand, resembling sifted charcoal. This beach has actually been formed by lava streams and volcanic cinders, and its deep tone forms a strong contrast with the blue of the sky. and the blue of the waters. The earth alone, in that sunny brightness, seems able to retain a shadow. The villages bordered or traversed by the railway, Portici, celebrated in one of Alber's operas, Resina, Torre del Greco, Torre del Annunziata, whose dwellings with their arcades and terraced roofs attract the traveler's gaze, have, notwithstanding the intensity of the sunlight and the southern love for whitewashing, something of a Plutonian and ferruginous character like Birmingham or Manchester. The very dust is black there. An impalpable soot clings to everything. One feels that the mighty forge of Vesuvius is panting and smoking only a few paces off. The three friends left the station at Pompeii, laughing among themselves at the odd commingling of antique and modern ideas suggested by the sign, Pompeii Station, a Greco-Roman city and a railway depot. They crossed the cotton field, with its fluttering white bulls, between the railway and the disinterred city, and at the inn, which has been built just without the ancient rampart, they took a guide, or, more correctly speaking, the guide took them, a calamity which is not easily avoided in Italy. It was one of those delightful days, so common in Naples, when the brilliancy of the sunlight and the transparency of the air cause objects to take such hues as in the north would be deemed fabulous and appear indeed to belong to the world of dreams rather than that of realities. The northern visitor who has once looked upon that glow of azure and gold is apt to carry back with him into the depths of his native bogs an incurable nostalgia. Having shaken off a corner of her cinder shroud, the resurrected city again rose with her thousand details under a dazzling day. The cone of Vesuvius, furrowed with striae of blue, rosy, and violet-hued lavas, ruddily bronzed by the sun, towered sharply defined in the background. A thin haze, almost imperceptible in the sunlight, hooded the blunt crest of the mountain. At first sight, it might have been taken for one of those clouds which shadow the brows of lofty peaks on the fairest days. Upon a nearer view, slender threads of white vapor could be perceived rising from the mountain summit, as from the orifices of a perfuming pan, to reunite above in a light cloud. The volcano, being that day in a good humor, smoked his pipe peacefully, but for the example of Pompeii buried at his feet, no one would have ever suspected him of being by nature any more ferocious than Montmartre. On the other side of the fair hills, with outlines voluptuously undulating like the hips of a woman, barred the horizon, and, further yet, the sea, that in other days bore Pyramis and Tyramis under the ramparts of the city, extended its azure boundary. Of all spectacles, the sight of Pompeii is one of the most surprising. The sudden backward leap of 19 centuries astonishes even the least comprehensive and most prosaic natures. 2 paces lead you from the antique life to the life of today, and from Christianity to paganism. Thus, when the 3 friends beheld those streets wherein the forms of a vanished past are preserved yet intact, they were strangely and profoundly affected, however well prepared by the study of books and drawings they might have been. Octavian, above all, seemed stricken with stupefaction, and, like a man walking in his sleep, mechanically followed the guide, without hearing the monotonous nomenclature that the varlet had learned by heart and recited like a lesson. He gazed wildly on those ruts hollowed out in the cyclopean pavements of the streets by the chariot wheels, and which seemed to be of yesterday, so fresh do they appear. Those inscriptions in red letters, skillfully traced upon the surfaces of the walls by rapid strokes of the brush, theatrical advertisements, notices of houses to let, votive formulas, signs, announcements of all descriptions, not less curious than a freshly discovered fragment of the walls of Paris, with advertising bills and placards attached, would prove 1,000 years hence for the unknown people of the future. Those houses, whose shattered roofs permit one to penetrate at a glance into all those interior mysteries, all those domestic details which historians invariably neglect, and whereof the secrets die with dying civilizations, those fountains that even now seem scarcely dried up, that forum whose restoration was interrupted by the great catastrophe, and whose architraves and columns, all ready cut and sculptured, still seem waiting in their purity of angle to be lifted into place. Those temples, consecrated in that mythologic age when atheists were yet unknown, to gods that have long ceased to be. Those shops wherein the merchant only is missing. That public tavern, where may still be seen the circular stain of the drinking cups on the marble. That barracks, with its ochre and minimum painted columns, on which the soldiers scratch grotesque caricatures of battle. And those juxtaposed double theaters of song and drama, which might even now resume their entertainments, were not the companies who performed in them long since decay, and at present occupied perchance in closing the bunghole of a cask, or stopping a crevice in the wall, after the fashion of Alexander's ashes or Caesar's dust, according to the melancholy reflections of Hamlet. Fabio climbed atop the thymele of the tragic theater, while Max and Octavian climbed into the upper benches, and there, with extravagant gestures, he commenced to recite whatever poetical fragments came to his memory, much to the terror of the lizards who fled, vibrating their tails, and hid themselves in the joints of the ruined stonework. Although the brazen or earthen vessels formerly used to reverberate sounds no longer existed, Fabio's voice sounded none the less full and vibrant. The guide then conducted them across the open fields which overlie those portions of Pompeii still buried, to the amphitheater situated at the other end of the city. They passed under those trees, whose roots plunged down through the roofs of the edifices interred, displacing tiles, cleaving ceilings asunder, and disjointing columns, and they traversed the farms where vulgar vegetables sprout above wonders of art, material images of that oblivion wherewith time covers all things. The amphitheater caused them little surprise. They had seen that of Verona, vaster and equally well preserved. Besides, the arrangement of such antique arenas was as familiar to them as that of those in which bullfights are held in Spain, and which they much resemble save in solidity of construction and beauty of material. Accordingly, they soon retraced their footsteps and gained the street of Fortune by a cross-pass, listening half distractedly to the cicerone, who named each house they passed by the name which had been given it immediately upon its discovery, owing to some characteristic peculiarity: the house of the brazen bull, the house of the fawn, the house of the ship, the temple of Fortune, the house of Meleager, the tavern of Fortune, at the angle of the consular road, Via Consularia, the Academy of Music, the public market, the pharmacy, the surgeon's shop, the custom house, the house of the Vestals, the inn of Albinus, and so on, until they came to that gate which leads to the street of the tombs. Within the interior arch of this brick-built gate, once adorned with statues which have long since disappeared, may be noticed 2 deep grooves designed to receive a sliding portcullis after the style of a medieval donjon, to which era, indeed, one might have supposed such a defense peculiar. And this, my darling, ends our story time for today. As always, I hope you have very sweet and creepy dreams. Good night.